Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 403 through 405, which will cover manga chapters 510 through 513. And this is it, the dramatic and emotional climax of the Sabaody Arc. And yeah, this one will leave you speechless, as it did me when I first read it. Alright, so synopsis. The Straw Hats managed to take down the Pacifista, but they don't have any time to rest as one after another a cavalcade of overwhelmingly strong enemies appear, culminating in the complete defeat of the Straw Hat Pirates. Alright, so differences, there really aren't too many, aside from that addition of the montage at the very end of episode 405, kind of showing each crew member as they join. I don't know, that's not really a difference, that's just kind of like an artistic decision to extend the episode so that it ends at the correct moment. I guess one change you could say, and I mentioned how I like this later on in this episode, but the bubble popping each time the Straw Hats get repelled out of existence. Well, not existence, but that section, the bubble does pop, but it only happens once after all of them go. So as soon as Robin gets repelled away in the manga, that's when the bubble is shown popping. And like I said, I like the decision that they made to include a bubble popping for each Straw Hat member in the anime. So that's not so much as a difference as it's just like, again, an artistic decision made to sort of either, as well as elongate the episode, but also more symbolically, I think it fits better. But anyways, yeah, aside from that, I mean, everything else was adapted fairly faithfully from the manga here. So let's just move into my thoughts on the episode. So straight away, we resume with the Straw Hats and the pair in Kid and Law taking on their respective Kuma pacifistas and struggling, I might add, which does not bode well for them. Oda really puts things into perspective just how strong these things are when the whole of the entire Straw Hat crew, 9-on-1, can barely put up a fight against this thing, while also the pair of Kid and Law are also unable to beat these things. Facing Aokiji and seeing his strength in Long Ring Longland was quite the wake-up call in terms of the fact that the difficulty curve of this journey has significantly gone up, but since Kuma on Thriller Bark and now here on Sabaody, seeing these copies of Kuma as well as the more ruthless Admiral mow through these supposedly powerful rookies with bounties higher than we've ever seen is not only reinforcing that wake-up call, but now it's starting to turn into a general sense of uneasiness. I know for me personally, I was beginning to wonder how they were going to get out of this situation, but also for the future because at the moment, these enemies seem near unbeatable given their current strength. But I like that. It's what makes this part of the story so compelling is that even though you know everyone is going to somehow be all right because it is a shonen series, you really didn't know what was going to happen or how they were going to overcome this seemingly insurmountable obstacle. Sabaody will always be one of the most memorable experiences reading and watching One Piece because I specifically remember how palpable the tension was each chapter at this moment in time. And I love that during their fight with the other crew members, they get their chance to shine a bit too, with Zoro Weekend as well as Sanji and Luffy having exerted themselves. Chopper doesn't hesitate to jump in and save Zoro, while Frankie then jumps in to save Chopper. And we get this sort of rotating carousel of Straw Hats jumping in to save each other. And say, you know, with Robin, then Brooke and Usopp and then Robin again. And then finally Nami gets her chance to attack as well. And I think my favorite one has got to be Robin's second appearance where she does this like head slam. so she like grows like several bigger arms and just slams Kuma's head down to sort of backfire the mouth beam on himself. And I don't know, something about the simplicity as well as the ridiculousness contrasted with sort of the life and death seriousness of the situation always cracks me up about that attack. Zoro does regain his composure, and again, I love that in the serious moments in the heat of the battle, Sanji will still defer to Zoro and actually follow his commands. When he tells Sanji to kick Kuma over to him, Sanji does it without question. Then we get to see the return of the Kyutoryu Ashura, or the Nine Sword technique, and it's confirmed for sure that whatever Zoro is doing, everyone else can in fact see it, which was kind of a lingering question in my mind. I mean, I know Kaku indicated that he noticed it too, but we now have Chopper and Brook both commenting on the fact that they can see this. And again, I still don't quite know what's happening. But anyways, Zoro shows off a new move called the Makyusen, which in the subs is translated as the 9 lightning slashes, although directly translated is the demonic 9 flashes. Unfortunately, I can't think of nor find any food wordplay with this move name, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, it just seems like the Ashura, like the 9 sword, the Kyutoryu moves don't really have word food play with them as far as I can tell. So that's kind of a bummer. But anyways, with that last spirit from Sanji Zoro, and then as well as the finishing move from Luffy with the first showing of the Gear 3rd Gigant Rifle, finally taking down the Pacifista, this leaves them all incredibly worn out. And while Luffy wants to take a breather, which I always felt was a little odd considering how much we've seen Luffy be able to push himself, but I guess using Gear 2nd and 3rd in back-to-back succession for an entire fight really wears his stamina down considerably, and we start to see the limits of Luffy here as well. Although, like always, Sanji, the strategically smart one, prioritizes hiding themselves above all else, and he recommends that they go in hiding first before they rest. Unfortunately, they don't get to rest or hide, as they're immediately spotted by Sentomaru, the captain of the Marine Science Unit, who has another pacifista, this time designated PX1, whereas the one they just took down was PX4. Not that I think that necessarily the designation of their numbers really indicate the strength or the rank in this case, but either way, this is bad, like really bad. Reading the situation, we get to actually see Luffy again maturing a little bit more as a captain, as we've seen sort of his character and his arc progress ever since Long Ring Long Land over the last several story arcs, ever since their run-in with Aokichi. Luffy, instead of just focusing on punching his way out as he normally does, decides something unthinkable up till now, and that point is really hammered home by the reaction of his crew as well. And this is the best thing for his nakama right now, is to run. The monster trio decide to split up and head up a group of 3 each to protect them. But things go from worse to oh fudge, as Luffy is seemingly no match for Sentomaru due to some sort of technique that's throwing him off. But that's not even the worst part, as Kizaru comes in from nowhere to head off Zoro's group. At this point, I cannot tell you how on the edge of your seat the story has become. Like, this was brutal to read week to week, because every chapter I just wanted to know so badly what happens next. And yeah, episode 403 ends with Kizaru seemingly having Zoro dead to rights, with Usopp and Brook just helpless, with this huge Kizaru just towering over them and Zoro on the ground. Before we move on to episode 404, quick notes about Sentomaru. The first is kind of a slight translator's note. So Sentomaru makes it a point to mention that he's got the toughest defense in the world, as well as being the tightest-lipped person in the world. So in Japanese, this is sort of like wordplay, but kind of not, as the word Sentomaru uses for toughest and tightest are actually the same word in Japanese. He uses the word katai, which means hard or solid. So someone with a katai guard, which is literally just a hard guard, means someone has the toughest defense. And someone with a katai kuchi, which kuchi is mouth, is someone with a hard mouth, meaning tight-lipped. And it's really not so much of a wordplay or a joke or anything. It's just a theming that Sentomaru uses with the way he describes himself that's a tad lost in translation. It's not really a big deal, but I guess I kind of wanted to mention it. The other 2 fun facts about Sentomaru is that he's voiced by Kazue Iruka, who you might remember as the temporary voice of Chopper during Water 7 while Ikue Otani was on maternity leave. In addition, a fact that was omitted from the anime is that in Sentomaru's title card in the manga, it's also mentioned that he's Dr. Vegapunk's personal bodyguard as well. So that's why he's so in with Vegapunk, and he knows so much about the pacifistas. All right, now on to episode 404. First off, it has to be said for an episode this awesome, the animation yet again is just awful. The drawings are so flat and weirdly proportioned throughout, except for one particular scene, which it seems the entire budget for this episode went into. Like, seriously, that one shot from below of Chopper and Robin as they're terrified for Zoro's life looks so bad. I don't know what the heck happened to Chopper's face here, but it looks so weird. Like, it just looks like it was scribbled together and he looks all like mishmashed. It looks terrible. Anyways, rant over and back to the episode. Zoro is on the ground at the mercy of Kizaru as he can no longer move due to his injuries. And I really like this, that it carries over from Thriller Bark. Like, each arc isn't just a complete reset. And everyone just freezes in fear, except Luffy screams at the top of his lungs to snap Usopp out of it and get him to do something to help Zoro. While it delays him a bit, even with the help of Brook and Robin assisting, their efforts to attack as well as escape are meaningless against a man made of literal light. And as hard as it is to see the Straw Hats getting their asses handed to them, I just love this moment from sort of an audience, a reader, or viewer perspective. It's like peak tension and suspense. The dread and anxiety you feel over the safety of Zoro and the others is so overwhelming here, which is only heightened by the expression that Oda gives his characters and sort of the life that each voice actor brings to each character. That slow buildup of Kizaru's unsettlingly calm yet sort of gleeful sounding molasses paced voice as he kind of takes pleasure in the thought of wiping out Zoro is incredible. Until we get one of the most coolest and amazing entrances in the series to date, and where pretty much all the budget and time went into for this episode. And as you'll see, we see this incredibly fluid 360 shot of Rayleigh just dashing in out of nowhere to redirect Kizaru's leg attack. I mean, my God, this moment was so amazing. In the manga, it looked awesome too, and narratively incredible as well. Like, it was very relieving to see Rayleigh there to save them. But the anime ratchets this up to a whole new level because you don't actually see him dashing in and actually performing the kick in the manga. So when you turn the page, he's just already kicking Kizaru's leg up. But I love how you get to see all of that in the anime. But I also love that most people who are seeing this moment for the first time, including myself way back then, after you've had a moment to like come back down from that high emotion, it dawns on you the significance of what Rayleigh had just done. Not the fact that he saved Zoro's life, but the insane fact that Rayleigh was able to physically touch Kizaru's Logia body somehow. I mean, this is a huge game changer. He clearly did it without Sea Stone because Kizaru's attack wasn't nullified and his powers weren't disabled. Like, the kick still went and they were still working, just redirected. Rayleigh was actually able to touch an active Logia fruit user's body, something we haven't seen since Luffy accidentally rammed Smoker in the back at that tavern in Alabasta. But I still think that one was done more for laughs than anything. This time, however, it was a legit combat situation where someone was able to counteract the invulnerability of a Logia fruit user. And later we also see that whatever it is he's doing can also be applied to his weapon, as he can actually stop Kizaru's lightsaber with his own metal sword. Now, that move that Kizaru uses isn't an actual lightsaber, but it might as well be. It's called the Amano Murakumo, which literally means Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven, which is a legendary sword referenced in Japanese folklore, apparently. And I've actually heard this in other series too, and it's also known as the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, but this sword, or at least the name, actually appears in quite a few other things like other anime and other video games, which, yeah, I have recognized this in some of the other series. But moving on, this means that there is in fact a way to actually fight Logia fruit users without the use of Sea Stones. And most likely Luffy is going to have to learn this from Rayleigh at some point. I also love that these two powerhouses talk about such dramatic things in such a nonchalant tone in speech. Like, when you listen to them talking, especially in Japanese, it just sounds like two people like speaking in a casual business lunch meeting, but they're talking about executing the Straw Hats, um, which I always found a little comical. But yeah, Luffy is full on in run mode, ordering everyone to just get the hell out of there. And I like seeing this progression in Luffy's sort of captain ability. Instead of just standing his ground like usual, he understands the situation and puts his crew above everything and has them run because I can tell you, like, if it was just Luffy, he'd probably still keep fighting till he was dead. But with his crew, he understands that he needs to protect them and makes the decision to actually run. And it's in times of crisis we get to see just how great these characters are and why we love them so much. Like, again, to everyone that has this theory that Sanji doesn't care about Zoro or hates him, immediately when he realizes that the PX-1 is after him, he goes in to save them, even leaving Nami's side. He covers it by saying that he's going to save Usopp. We all know the target is Zoro, and Zoro for his part doesn't want to cost Usopp and Brook their lives, and asks to be left behind. But of course, Usopp, despite how terrified he is with the PX-1 right on their tail, isn't about to leave Zoro and is gonna run like hell, even with Zoro on his back. And Brook, who just joined the crew like a week ago, is already ready to lay down his life for them and moves in to attack the PX-1. It's like a fucking gauntlet, with Sanji only able to knock it off balance, but as we learned at Thriller Bark, whatever Vegapunk is using to reinforce Kuma and the Pacifistas, it's too hard for even Sanji, and it hurts Sanji to kick them. And I think one thing I also want to point out here with Sanji is that he fully knew what the outcome was going to be, and judging by his words to Usopp to just keep running once he's on the ground with his leg hurt, unable to move, Sanji was again just throwing his own life to save the lives of his nakama yet again, adding to another instance in a concerningly ever-growing list of how many times Sanji is all too willing to just throw his own life away at the cost of saving others. But again, we've talked about that in the past, and we'll talk more about this in the future as it keeps happening. The emotions running through you throughout this entire sequence is just insane. It is easily some of the best I've ever seen in any piece of fiction ever. Like, the rapid fire sequence of events that go from bad to hopeless is crazy as we see Luffy powerless against Sentomaru. Zoro is on the ground. Sanji is now shot and wounded. Chopper, seeing all this happen around him, gets desperate and immediately chomps down on 3 rumble balls right off the bat, going to Monster Point. As if things couldn't possibly get any worse, we hear the voice of Kuma, the real Kuma, behind Usopp, and because of the fact that, yeah, we know it's real because he can talk and he's got the massive Bible, unlike the other pacifistas, Zoro tries to stand, but then Kuma asks that same creepy-ass question he asked Perona just before he wiped her out, and then somehow, with his powers, makes Zoro disappear. I remember when this happened and I read this for the first time, I couldn't believe what I saw. Like, this sort of like numbness and tingling washes over you. We're left just as shocked and speechless as the other Straw Hats themselves. Like, Zoro is gone and the Straw Hats are going to lose. Like, a complete defeat is imminent. And a million questions just start flooding you. Like, where did Zoro go? What happened to him? The pawpaw fruit can't just dematerialize you, so he must have been repelled somewhere. But where? Like, Marine headquarters, Impel Down, NES lobby. Like, so many things run through your head at this moment. And we unfortunately or fortunately don't get much time to linger on these questions because the very next episode or chapter gets even more nuts. First off, in regards to episode 405, like I mentioned in the differences sections, one of the anime-only directorial choices that I love is how they symbolically use the bubbles to represent the Straw Hats, and each time one of them gets taken out by Kuma, a bubble pops. It's a very small and kind of unnecessary addition, but it really adds to sort of that dramatic feel and tension of this moment. And the voice acting in this episode is incredible. Not that it's never not incredible, but I feel like the main cast really bring their like S+ game here. Like, especially Kappei Yamaguchi and Mayumi Tanaka, right off the bat with their like range of anger and fear sounds so real. And Nami is just shaking as well because she's the only one up till now who has actually seen this ability in action and still doesn't know how it works. For Usopp's part, and again, I sound like a broken record at this point, but as always, despite how cowardly Usopp is most of the time, when the chips are down, Usopp is brave. Like, he is a brave person. And here, as the only person left standing between him and a downed Brook and Sanji, he takes a stand against Bartholomew Kuma and even demands to know what he's done to Zoro. Another really great moment for Usopp that often gets overlooked when people start complaining about how chicken Usopp is. But yeah, it's moments like this, like, yeah, Usopp he's standing there to protect Sanji and Brook against a real Shichibukai. Then something really curious happens. As the PX-1 is about to fire on Usopp from behind, Kuma steps in and repels him away too. Or it, I guess I should say. Confusing everyone, both everyone in the story and all of us in the audience. However, I do remember at that time when I first read this, I was so caught up in the story that this really never even registered with me because I was so intent on reading what was going to happen next that I didn't even stop to think, could Kuma actually be trying to save them? I mean, he did show them kind of mercy on Thriller Bark, even if it came at the great cost of Zoro's health. But in any case, it still doesn't take away from the craziness of this moment as Brook yet again shows how loyal he is, and without any hint of hesitation, then jumps in front of Usopp, who's trying to help Sanji to his feet, but is ultimately repelled away as well. And the visible frustration in Sanji's voice and body is immense. You can really feel everything and all that feeling that Sanji is feeling, like with Hiroki Hirota's like voice acting, and then just the way he sort of like grinds at his head in his own failure and frustration to protect two of his nakama now. And then the desperation in Luffy's voice at how utterly powerless he is at stopping this sort of single-handed dismantling of his most prized treasure, his nakama. And then there's the abject terror that Usopp is experiencing, being the only one left standing against his Shichibukai. Usopp is now gone, and in a fit of rage, Sanji charges into Kuma, only to get repelled away as well. And something is strange here, though, because immediately after, he just warps right to Rayleigh and whispers something in his ears that's inaudible to us. But we do hear Rayleigh's response that Kuma wants him to trust him in regards to something. And again, this should have been a huge flag at the time that something was off about Kuma, and perhaps that Kuma was actually trying to help the Straw Hats and not harm them. But again, I remember I completely missed these clues when I first read this because I was just so engrossed in this complete dismantling of the Straw Hats. But yeah, I mean, when you really look at it from like a rational standpoint, especially upon a second or third reread or rewatch, you can really tell, I think, yeah, Kuma is actually trying to help them secretly, while still trying to maintain his sort of villainous exterior. Also, Kuma's response to Kizaru asking him what he thinks he's doing is awesome, when he essentially just kind of in a polite way says, F you, I do what I want because I'm a pirate. It is pretty awesome. However, even if Kuma may be trying to help him or help the Straw Hats, it still doesn't change the fact that to Luffy, he is seeing his nakama being taken away from him one by one by an enemy far more powerful than him, as he's just completely helpless to stop it. He is growing more and more desperate, and this is probably the most feeble we've ever seen Luffy, which is something I never thought I'd see. In a series like One Piece, where the tone has pretty much been near a constant feeling of optimism and excitement, I mean, sure, there have been some sad and fearful moments, but those have always been kind of backed by a sense that things will eventually be overcome. I think this moment sort of has a feeling of like desperation, like you don't know how they're going to recover from something like this. But eventually, the final four nakama, Nami, Frankie, Chopper, and finally Robin, all get taken from him, and Luffy is left alone to sit with his frustration and failure. And it's a serious emotional gut punch to see the always happy-go-lucky Luffy reduced to a helpless, pathetic mess, just tears rolling down his eyes and frustrated and like grinding his head against the ground. I mean, this was chilling and hard to see Luffy like this. And yeah, here's where that character arc for Luffy that I hinted at when talking about Aokiji back on Long Ring Longland comes into play. It was foreshadowed and warned that Luffy was still too weak to protect his nakama. Now, he was saved by Aokiji's sort of benevolence and laziness, but it wasn't lost on Luffy that his words still ring true, which is why he developed Gears 2nd and 3rd. But even then, that was still not even close to being enough. Luffy still failed. Sure, Luffy's grown a lot in terms of both being a captain as well as his strength, but he still has a lot to go, and you can even see it in these episodes. Sure, Luffy wisely ordered the crew to run, but in those final moments, he became engulfed in rage and lost his senses. And because he tried to rush off and go back to trying to punch his way to a solution, he lost everything. And I'm not saying that he probably could have outran Kuma, but perhaps had he grabbed Robin and just ran, he could have at least had a chance at saving her and himself, just and so they could regroup. But instead, he lost everything. And yeah, I'll never forget the chills and speechlessness that this arc gave me. It was a literal whirlwind of crazy events happening in the culmination of the Straw Hats' first defeat and in incredible dramatic fashion as well. This was definitely a turning point in the series for both the characters, the range of the story, but also the scale of the series as it was about to change. This moment where the Straw Hats get defeated always felt like a middle act of a story, kind of like The Empire Strikes Back in Star Wars. But this is kind of just the beginning, though, because the next portion of the series is something special and a really interesting change of pace for One Piece that deviates slightly from the formula that we're all used to. And I think it was great. It's a great timing for this because you can't, as Thriller Bark kind of proved, you can't outdo Enies Lobby and Water 7. Like that formula has been perfected. And so it was nice to see a good change of pace here. And I didn't think the series could actually get better in terms of storytelling, but once again, Oda surprises me by going in a direction that I had not even considered. And more importantly, I had no idea where you go from here. Like, what was going to happen? Is everyone okay? Where did they all get sent? Did they all get sent to the same place, or were they separated? And the story will be how they find their way back to each other. Oda just left enough ambiguity to leave you anxiously wondering, was this a good or a bad thing that Kuma did to them? I mean, it's so good. Like this portion of the story is so good, and the thing is, it gets better. That's the crazy thing. But yeah, we'll leave that there. So yeah, the next episode will be a little different, as I'll cover the 2 filler episodes that succeed these, as well as do a mini review of the Sabaody arc now that the arc is over, so that we can kind of start the next arc fresh without awkwardly only talking about the first episode of the Amazon Lily arc. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes or to see some pictures of my manga collection. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking out the time to listen to my podcast. I'll have a short, brief spoiler section, so stay tuned if you're interested in that. If not, I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. This is obviously going to be unscripted for the most part, but yeah, clearly this whole arc really set up a lot of things going forward. But I think the thing I wanted to talk mostly in terms of spoilers about is mostly Kuma and the time skip. I just found, it makes me really like feel stupid how I didn't pick up on this when I first read this. I obviously did when I went back and reread it and rewatched it, but yeah, I found it really interesting, the whole thing with Kuma and how he's developed as a character from going as this like scary villain to essentially being a tragic hero. He saves the Straw Hats here. He protects the Sunny. He then, sacrifices himself for the cause, the Revolutionary Army. And the fact that he is part of the Revolutionary Army was interesting as well. And yeah, and then he was ultimately punished by the world government and the celestial dragons, and his memory completely wiped. But obviously, we learned that his memories were preserved by Vegapunk, and the whole thing with Bonnie, and it's really, yeah, Kuma's story is so interesting, and it's not even complete yet, which is the crazy thing. It's still ongoing right as we speak. Even to this day, we still don't quite have that resolution of what happened after Bonnie saw the memories of Kuma. We still don't know what happened in I think it was what, chapter 1080, 1080 maybe, 10 or 1079, I can't remember. But yeah, and then this whole, I find it interesting how Sabaody is now essentially like a mirror of what's going on in Egghead Island. Like, Egghead Island is essentially Sabaody all over again, but with the outcome a little different, with the Straw Hats being a lot stronger now. You still have Sentomaru. And can we talk about Sentomaru being a good guy? That's another thing that really shocked me after seeing this. Like, I know Sentomaru never overtly felt like an evil guy, but he didn't seem like he was going to be like a good guy either. But the fact that he's kind of changed sides in Egghead Island is also another funny thing. And I love how now, instead of the PX pacifistas, we have the Seraphim pacifistas as well in Egghead Island. And the parallels between the two arcs is very interesting. I mean, you could really say that the entire pre-time skip and post-time skip, they mirror each other very closely. It is interesting how that works out. Dressrosa is very similar to Arabasta and all of that. And so, and there's a bunch of other examples I could list off, but it is really interesting that Sabaody and Egghead are now very closely linked in terms of their structure and sort of the similarities in events. And you even have Kizaru coming back and trying to take out the Straw Hats exactly the same way he did here in Sabaody. And so, obviously, for me, at this point in the story, I don't know how Egghead Island is going to complete, because obviously Oda is still on his hiatus from his eye surgery, which I believe the manga will be resuming in about a week, I think, at the time of this recording. So it'll be very interesting to see how Egghead ends in comparison to how Sabaody ended, because the parallels are very similar. And I really enjoyed watching that and seeing how everything is set up with Rayleigh and Kizaru, as well as how this moment sets off a chain reaction of events where, yeah, it leads to Luffy growing. And like I mentioned in the non-spoiler section, this is only the beginning in terms of Luffy's growth. Like, he experiences more and more loss as he goes until he can finally grow into the hero that we need him to be once we get to near the end of the series. And unfortunately, he does have to experience another failure in his brother Ace, and so, yeah, I think this is a very interesting part of the story. And like I said, Luffy's now on his own, and we see how he does without his nakama. And I think that was a really good change of pace too, like I mentioned. And yeah, I'm very looking forward to talking about Amazon Lily, Impel Downs, and of course, Marineford and the Summit War. Like, those, I love all these next arcs. There is something that I miss about sort of the feel of the pre-time skip era of One Piece. I love the entirety, but I think there was something very, very special. Like, if I had to choose between which one I liked more, pre or post time skip, I will always say pre, until something changes my mind about the next several chapters. But I think I like pre-time skip better. But anyways, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. So thank you for listening, and catch me on the next episode. See ya.